Thanks for joining us today. My name is Daryll Holland, and I am the Chief Information Security Officer at Education Horizons. We provide the engaged, synergetic sector, assetware, and Zunia school software systems. And through these products, we support thousands of schools and millions of people in over 60 countries. Today, I'm delighted to talk to you about the fundamentals of school cybersecurity. Securing school data is more important and more challenging than ever before. And I know firsthand just how overwhelming this challenge can feel. But I've been lucky enough to spend the last 2 decades serving as a school IT practitioner, as a consultant, and now as CISO here at Education Horizons. It's safe to say that I've seen schools at various stages of their cybersecurity journeys. My team and I have developed a framework to bring some order and clarity to this work. And this is our subject for today: school cybersecurity, where to begin. There are 8 different disciplines that we've identified as essential to getting your information security approach in shape. We start with the nitty-gritty, which is understanding exactly what data you're trying to protect. We then look at identifying and rating your information security risks so that you can prioritize your work. And from this foundation, we'll look at aligning your governing authority and school leadership team behind your mission. Then we'll look at building the right accountabilities, policies, and procedures for ongoing information security. And finally, we explore training for your teams alongside the role of external support and validation to keep your work moving forwards. Now, we've got a lot to get through, so we'll have to stay at a high level, but my goal is to share a framework with you that'll help you to understand your current cybersecurity posture and also clarify your priorities going forwards. In the interest of time, I'd be really grateful if you could ask your questions in the Q&A, and we'll come back to you after the webinar. Now, if you take one thing away from today, it should be this: true cybersecurity has to become part of your culture. No single technology or process will keep your data 100% safe. And without everyone pulling in the same direction, you will always be more vulnerable than you need to be. Okay, it might seem obvious, but the starting point for protecting your school's information is answering the first simple question here, which is, what information are you trying to protect? I can tell you this question is deceptively simple. I've seen IT teams build what look like great backup and recovery processes, but gaps have been exposed after an incident because the team hadn't verified the most critical data with their stakeholders. This is why you need a whole school perspective to understand what data you're trying to protect. So this work has to be led by your wider SLT with board oversight. There are 2 high-level questions here and a bunch of more detailed ones to come. But firstly, what happens with the information at your school? And what happens when you can't access that data? To help answer these questions, you need to work through the detail. Where does our data come from? Who has access to that data and why? Who processes that data and what school outcome are they trying to achieve? And who is that data shared with? In addition, where is it hosted? How is it secured? What are the workarounds if data is unavailable? And what school processes might be impacted by data loss? As you can see from the image on screen, this can feel a little bit daunting, but there are ways to manage this process. Further to what we've just discussed, I recommend mapping your data flows to help answer these questions. Now, your focus should be on understanding points of vulnerability and then identifying data protection options. You can see here the granular role-based permission system in our Zunia student information platform, showing who has access to what data. And at the end of this video, you can see the audit log tool in Zunia, which is a common feature across all of our products. Both of these tools are really helpful in understanding who has access to the data in this critical system, which is a part of the mapping process. Now, this work is likely to generate some fascinating insights. I once worked with a school that sent daily attendance spreadsheets to the local authority, and unfortunately, the spreadsheets included unnecessary student disability information. Worst of all, it was being sent to an email address that hadn't been monitored in years. You can imagine the consequences of a totally unnecessary data breach like this one. There are a number of data mapping models and processes available. Reach out to discuss how you can manage this process. I'll be happy to share my preferred data mapping model for you to consider. As you can see from the images on screen, your underlying systems can impact how easy data mapping can be. Streamlining your tech stack around core management systems can definitely help. And using API-driven secure integrations is also helpful in understanding how data flows throughout your systems. This is a priority for us in developing API layers in our engaged and synergetic school management systems. And it's also central to our 3rd generation platform, Zunia, which has a API first approach, which is part of our security by design principle. Now, once you've mapped and identified the data you're trying to protect, you can move on to managing security risks. I'll be absolutely honest, this can get a bit overwhelming. So to help you get through, I have a core principle for you to stick to and a set of steps to help you keep on track. In short, don't get overwhelmed. Think of it this way. How can you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. But of course, try to start with the juiciest parts. Our objective here is to effectively prioritize our risk responses, and your goal should be to develop a working risk map. To get to this point, you need to start wide and narrow down. This is the process my team and I have developed to simplify risk management. So step one, identify your school's risk appetite. Where is your school community more comfortable accepting risk? An example might be connected to innovation, for example, experimenting with new teaching methods, technologies, or even programs. Conversely, where does your school have very little tolerance for risk? Examples here could be health and safety of students, or a breach of student and community personal information. Every school is slightly different, and this will become super important in prioritizing your efforts. Step two, identify your information and technology assets. This includes things like student, staff, and family data, financial information and plans, devices, firewalls, routers, switches, and the list goes on. Spoiler alert, there is no easy way to make this list, so I suggest you start walking around your school and just listing what you see. This might sound crazy, but you have to start somewhere. And as I said before, you have to start wide in order to prioritize and narrow down your focus. Thirdly, identify risks by considering what could happen to each asset. Could it be lost, stolen, broken, breached, or even maybe corrupted? Start to identify the threats and vulnerabilities for each risk. So what is a threat? Well, it's a negative event that could happen to one of your assets. What circumstances might lead to that threat being realized? These are your vulnerabilities. Now, let me give you an example. Let's consider an example risk that could be unauthorized access to staff mailboxes. In this case, the threat is mailboxes being accessed through stolen credentials, but one vulnerability that could lead to the risk being realized is the lack of multi-factor authentication, which would have otherwise prevented access. Step four, define the likelihood and impact of each risk. So I recommend using a percentage score for likelihood. For example, very low could be 10 to 20%, ranging up to very high being 90 to 100%. Then establish a criteria to assess the impact. For example, severe impact could include disruption to the entire school with no workarounds, or maybe over $1 million of financial cost of an incident and response. This brings us to step 5, which is prioritizing your risks. Now, based on your assessment, give each risk a score out of 5 for likelihood and for impact. And now you can populate your risk map, as you can see here on the screen. The way I do this is a count of the number of risks in each box on an interactive Power BI report, and I work from the top right backwards in terms of priority. This is when you need to validate with your board and your SLT, which we'll cover in the next section. But you can focus now on your highest priority risks and work backwards. At this point, I recommend considering each risk one by one and applying one of the 4 T's. So will you treat the risk by putting in a control or a mitigation? Will you tolerate the risk by accepting and monitoring over time? Will you transfer the risk by outsourcing to a third party? Or perhaps terminate the risk by shutting down that activity completely? There are many examples of treating, tolerating, and terminating risks, but increasingly schools are exploring how to transfer information security risks out. We support a number of examples with our own systems at Education Horizons. Cloud hosting for Engage, Sector, Synergetic, Zunia, and Assetware allows us to transfer and manage many security challenges centrally. And you can see from the screen some of the challenges with on-premise hosting, and hopefully some of the benefits will resonate with you too. And these might include being able to host the system in a fully secure infrastructure, having security updates applied automatically, knowing that behind the hosting are a team of experts that do this day in, day out, and being in a position where your IT team can focus more on supporting teachers and less on managing infrastructure, which is something I was extremely passionate about when I was IT director for TCAT in the UK. 24/7 infrastructure monitoring is always very useful. And of course, having scalable architecture that grows with you. Now, obviously, there are many benefits to the cloud, and security benefits are, in my opinion, at the top of the tree. And the shift to cloud is a great example of transferring security risks to a certified third party. We've also integrated the Stripe global payments platform into Synergetic and Engage, with Zunia coming soon. And this is helping shift critical personal financial data risks away from schools. The shift to online payments is significant in helping schools to avoid holding and protecting personal financial data. And through Stripe, schools are able to run both ad hoc payments and recurring payment plans without ever holding parent financial details. Because Stripe is a big global third party, they bring the highest standard of data security to their systems, and that includes disputes management and fraud protection options. And it's another great example of transferring financial data security risks to a certified third party. Now, once you've mapped your data and you've scored your risks, you need your board to validate your priorities so that you can get to work. As I mentioned earlier, cybersecurity is not really a technical process, it's a cultural one that involves everyone. This means getting everyone pulling in the same direction, and they have to be on the same page. And this starts with your board and your senior leadership team. So I'm going to focus on the board in this section, but almost everything I say applies to your SLT as well. So board alignment is critical because it sets the tone for your whole school community. It also inspires confidence in cybersecurity as an investment. And it builds confidence in your SLT to handle a crisis should one happen. Let's imagine a worst case scenario and work backwards from there. So where there is a cybersecurity breach, you want your board to have enough familiarity with the school information risks that they don't feel blindsided. They should take comfort in the investment that you've made in cybersecurity, and they should have confidence in you and your advice so that you can work together effectively in a crisis. To get to this point, you need to keep asking yourself, what is my board's understanding of our school's cybersecurity risks and approach? And does this align with me and my senior leadership team? And I suggest the best way to answer these questions is simply to ask them. So ask your board and your SLT, what are your school's key vulnerabilities in their eyes? What are the most important types of data that you need to secure? What are the harmful consequences resulting from security breaches? And what are the costs of non-compliance? So think legal, financial, and reputational. From this foundation, you can start shaping a shared understanding across your board and your SLT. And you could start by sharing an environmental scan. This will allow you to frame their responses against an external risk analysis of the education sector as a whole. Now, this is a great point to introduce your working risk map that we discussed in earlier slides. Use this map to work through your own responses to the central questions asked and listed on the screen. And explain how you got to this version of your risk map. This will help you to get the group used to different risk priorities and how they fit together. And then you can get them used to asking, or you can get them used to working on the highest priorities that we discussed before, in the top right-hand corner, and working down from that point. It's really important to help the group get comfortable in asking useful questions. And this is essential to build their confidence in the discussion, and also it'll build their confidence in you and your work, something that we call trust capital. Remember, these people are not experts, so you might want to consider bringing in an outside expert or an advisor or even a board member. Now you want to focus on the ongoing board conversation. So I recommend quarterly reporting, but certainly no less than twice a year. Stay out of the weeds and try and focus on your top 5 risks. This should be about information loss, remember, not losing keyboards from a library or something equally as trivial. Give the group time to talk so that you can build that sense of collaboration and ownership. And keep reiterating the risks of non-compliance. Remember, legal, financial, and reputational, so that you can keep everyone engaged. And in terms of content, you should consider including progress updates against key initiatives, budget tracking, a review on the changing security risk environment, and always, always, always build the sense of cybersecurity as an investment in prevention, not just a capability that's deployed when something goes wrong. At this point, you should have clarity about the data you're protecting and the relevant risks and threats and vulnerabilities that go alongside them. A priority risk of a set of risks and actions to focus on should be in existence as well, and a board and SLT that are aligned on investing in cybersecurity culture at your school. Now you just have to make it work. That's the easy part, right? This leads us to your formal accountabilities. Now, accountabilities work best when they help shape behavior, but formal accountabilities alone can't do that. Accountabilities depend on a shared sense of responsibility to get to work effectively, which means they're a necessary but not sufficient part of the picture. Look at it this way. Responsibility is horizontal because everyone is necessary to get the job done, but accountability is vertical because the buck always has to stop at the top. The key question you should be asking here is, does everyone know and understand their role in cybersecurity? So, for example, what role does a teacher play? What roles do IT, administration, finance, SLT, and even the board play? How do we make sure this understanding runs throughout our school from bottom to top? The first step is to work with IT and HR. So give everyone the right context for their cybersecurity work. Narrow the space for discretion by clarifying hard responsibilities wherever possible, and make sure that you always focus on shared responsibility, learning, and development. But be very clear at the outset what the penalties are for non-conformance. So practical steps you could take with IT and HR include putting cybersecurity responsibilities, sorry, in position descriptions. Be sure to discuss security responsibilities in each person's induction, and ensure that specific security items are included in your staff exit workflows. Structurally, overall accountability has to sit with senior leadership. In my view, you simply must have one person taking point on information security in your SLT. Often InfoSec sits with IT in schools, which makes sense in terms of efficiency, but in reality, this can create massive conflicts of interest if responsibilities aren't clearly defined. One option to consider is using a virtual CISO. Now, this can guarantee having an unbiased strategic perspective, and it can avoid conflict with IT's other strategic objectives. I'm a huge supporter of champions across your school. Consider nominating an information security champion in each department. Keep them engaged with your SLT point person and charge them with maintaining awareness and engagement with your school's information security mission in their department. And obviously, this character on screen is one of those champions. Now, once you've clarified everyone's accountabilities for information security, your next focus is the formal policies governing information behavior. Sometimes I think there are two types of people in the world. There's those who love policy documents and think they solve the world's problems. And there are those that think policies are a polite suggestion when they think of them at all. I can tell you that, in my opinion, they're both wrong. When you think about cybersecurity policies, you should have one question in mind. Do they shape behavior before an incident, or do they distribute blame after the fact? I can tell you that good policies change future behavior. Now, let's start with the bad policies first. These are the ones that list everything a person should not do. They are always very long and therefore hard to read or update. They use legalistic language, which is hard to absorb, and taken literally, day-to-day operations become unreasonably difficult. They're often unenforceable, covering so many behavior specifics that full monitoring is practically impossible. So, in my opinion, at a minimum, policies that change behavior need to be in plain English, concise, reasonable, and enforceable. My advice is to concentrate on the intent of the policy rather than verbose detail, and trust your staff to exercise discretion after absorbing the intent of the policy. Always align policies with accountabilities and responsibilities discussed previously, and then with the training that we'll discuss shortly. So, when you start building your new accessible and effective policy library, there are 4 that you should prioritize. Information security is number 1, so information security policy. This should be a school leadership statement about your information security commitment and intent. It shouldn't be a thou shalt not document. That belongs in your acceptable use policy, which comes next. I strongly recommend including a balance of high-level don'ts with a real focus on what constitutes valid use of networks and systems at your school. Brevity is essential, so condense wherever you can, and maybe bring your best writers in to help with this particular exercise, regardless of their technical expertise. And of course, make sure that whatever you include fits with our principles of enforceability and reasonableness. Now, your third priority policy is data retention. So each jurisdiction will be slightly different. Find the hard policies that you need to adhere to and look for local frameworks that are useful. In the UK, you can use the IRMS Schools Toolkit, which I've used previously to great effect. In Australia, government schools can reach out to their department. And for non-government schools, I recommend the Australian Society of Archivists Record Retention Schedule for non-government schools. Very good document. Number 4 is your privacy policy and privacy notice. Now, this should be freely available to anyone that asks for it, and it might be compulsory already depending on your jurisdiction. I recommend you always keep a hard copy on premise and, of course, make it available online. You should look for relevant frameworks in your jurisdiction, including ICO guidance in the UK and OAIC guidance in Australia. Essentially, in this policy, you need to explain the following: how you're using an individual's data, who it's shared with and under what conditions, where it's hosted, and the person's rights regarding that data. Now, there are penalties for not having this in place, so most of you should already have it set up, but if you don't, I recommend that you get cracking. You should consider forming a group of staff from across your school to review policies and ensure they're accessible to staff. There are many pieces of software that can support this work. As you can see on the screen in the short video, our Engage product allows you to store, update, and share your school policies using the documents and daybook features. And in Daybook, Engage lets you run collaborative processes to share, review, update, and approve policies across your leadership team, as you can see here on the screen. So how do you know that your policies are actually effective? Simple. You should be able to see that behavior is changing. For example, have the number of service desk tickets reporting dodgy emails gone up since your information security policies have been released? Has the number of data loss prevention alerts reduced if you have that in place? These are just some of the metrics that could indicate policies have been absorbed by your staff. You should look to work out your own and then monitor these going forwards. Now, anyone that's been through an audit will understand what I'm about to say. Your policies are meaningless if they don't substantially reflect the practice on the ground. So the gap between your plan or the plan and the reality is not your friend when it comes to information security. This comes back to our theme of building a cybersecurity culture, because staff have a responsibility to take high-level intent from policies and translate it into action. The simple test here is this: can you prove that your policies have been read, understood, acknowledged, and put into practice? If not, you're likely to be exposed to gaps that make breaches more likely. You'll also be exposed on the governance side in the event of an audit or review after an incident. Now, none of this is easy, but again, there are some useful steps you can take to align policies and procedures. I highly recommend documenting your key procedures, even at a high level. This helps identify policy conformance gaps, and it'll also help you to update your policies and procedures. Now, this means putting time into change management. And good change management means, of course, meeting people where they are. This means really understanding people's current level of interest and knowledge of your school's cybersecurity approach. And from here, you can start building an understanding and engagement with the overall mission. People who neither understand nor buy in are going to find it very hard to translate policy intent into practice. And you can't realize your cybersecurity goals without it being a shared mission. This leads us on to our next topic, which is training and awareness. So schools exist to support learning, but often their professional development feels a little bit like an add-on. And this could be even more the case with cybersecurity learning. I can tell you definitively, effective cybersecurity and the culture it depends on must put learning and development front and center. This should feel like a part of everyone's development experience at the school. As with most learning, start with the why. Consider centering your training and awareness around privacy and personal data protection. Everybody understands threats in the modern world, and increasingly data protection is the law. Basing training around personal protection from data breaches and legal consequences can be a powerful motivator. The best training results come from when training is short, sharp, and often. We use a system that performs a gap analysis of user knowledge and then pushes short training courses relevant to those gaps. These courses only take a few minutes and they're pushed out fortnightly. Now, on screen is the evil character Cyberto from the training system that we've chosen, and a picture of our beloved colleague, Paul, former colleague Paul, I should say. I share this because our team joke about Cyberto all of the time, including suggesting that Cyberto might actually be Paul in disguise and sharing this image on Teams to prove it. I share this because it's silly, but also because it's a great indicator that our training is resonating with the team. It's also a great informal metric showing that our policies and training are impacting behavior. And you shouldn't be afraid to think outside of the box when you're finding or looking for your own metrics to understand impact. Now, ideally, training will be transferable to people's personal lives, including important subjects such as password management, multi-factor authentication, and of course, phishing. It's worth noting that phishing is one of the oldest cyber threat vectors, but it remains the most common method of attack today. So please, please, please continually raise awareness about phishing. Run periodic phishing simulations if you can, and resist the urge to shame people who fail, but be ready to take repeat offenders aside for more training. When it comes to general training and awareness, I recommend considering a full tabletop security incident simulation. Now, you will find holes in your security posture and your incident management plan, but don't panic when you do. Take these lessons as great opportunities to grow and improve, and proceed with updating your plans, policies, and procedures. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground today, and I've tried to stay at a high level. Frankly, we could have spent an hour on each topic, and we'll explore going deeper into further sessions if there's interest. But I hope this gives you a framework to cut through the complexity of school cybersecurity, and I hope it helps you gain or regain your focus moving forwards. This complexity does raise one final point. Having external support and validation is critical for ongoing success in this space. Our own ISO 27001 processes cover all of our products and our business operations from end to end. And we verified all of our documentation and processes with an external auditor before we even went to our stage 1 audit. Having this kind of support was essential, and it's especially important when you're trying to get cybersecurity work off the ground. This type of external security support and validation is something we can provide on a limited basis here at Education Horizons. So if you're interested in using myself or my colleague Alan de Brincat as an external resource, please reach out to security@educationhorizons.com or use the QR code on the screen, and we'll arrange for an informal chat. If you're interested in exploring any of the topics in more detail, please reach out for a catch-up. And please watch your inboxes for a handy checklist covering the approach we've outlined here today. I hope you've enjoyed this first webinar in our school leadership series, and please keep an eye open for the next webinar in the series, which will be coming soon. My name is Daryll Holland. Thank you very much for your time.